order. This is meeting number 61 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Can we have everybody's attention, please? Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. With regard to interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and your understanding. Please also note that during the meeting it's not permitted to take pictures in the room or screenshots on Zoom. Should any technical issues arise, please advise me and we will suspend in order to ensure that all members participate fully. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on Friday, November the 25th, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of non-tariff barriers in Canada, existing and potential international trade agreements. Today we have with us from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Michael Harvey, Vice President, Policy and International. For the Canadian Nuclear Association, George Christitis, Vice President, Government Relations and International Affairs. For the Global Automakers of Canada, David Adams, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference. And the Tree of Life, Lisa McNeil, President. Welcome to all of you on this rainy, miserable Monday, and I hope you all bring a smile and some happiness to our outlook on today's schedule. Welcome all. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with a round of questions. Mr. Harvey, I invite you for an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour.
Good morning. I would first of all like to thank members of the committee for this opportunity to share my perspectives on non-tariff barriers in trade agreements. For almost 2 years now, I've been the Vice President, Policy and International at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We represent over 400 local, provincial, and territorial chamber members and about 100 association members for a total of 200,000 businesses represented. I'll make most of my presentation in English, but I will answer your questions in French when questions are asked in that language.
I have been involved in international trade discussions from private sector, government, and industry perspectives for more than 25 years. I'll limit my comments today to a more strategic level, as I'm not a specialized trade lawyer with deep technical experience. That said, many companies we represent are facing specific issues in different countries, and we have informed our members that they can make written submissions to you for this study. As committee members are aware, non-tariff barriers are obstacles to trade that are not in the form of tariffs. Common examples are quotas, technical regulations, and licensing requirements. These barriers can be challenging for businesses, and I do not believe that they will ever totally be eliminated. There are often legitimate reasons for technical regulations and licensing requirements, and businesses constantly manage them. What we seek is that these regulatory requirements not become discriminatory trade barriers. I recently participated virtually in a panel organized in Brussels by the Canada-EU Trade and Investment Association. I learned there that under CETA, regulatory cooperation has been key to solving disputes. CETA represents a third-generation trade agreement, one that aims to create deep economic and trade links by focusing on barriers to trade beyond tariffs. CETA has a complex system of regulatory cooperation with a long list of dialogues and committees dealing with specific areas of regulatory cooperation, as well as a general regulatory cooperation forum. I am not a specialist, but I learned that a number of disputes are being solved through these mechanisms. I was told that often the EU regulatory authorities simply need to better understand how the Canadian product is meeting the goals of the EU regulation, if not the letter of the law, or the way the law has been applied in the past. That said, we should not be naive. Sometimes these non-tariff barriers are largely an excuse to try to keep Canadian goods out of a market. When that is the case, Canada needs to expend political capital to push for barriers to be lifted. This political capital does not always need to be at the highest level. We do not want our bilateral relationships to be hostage to specific disputes. However, our trade commissioners need to push constantly to call out when non-tariff barriers are being used unfairly and work to ensure regulatory authorities prioritize meetings with Canadian regulators who are able to explain how our products meet the spirit of local requirements, taking away any excuses that may be used by local regulators to prevent market access. Dispute settlement mechanisms can often also be a key factor when seeking redress. Sometimes what regulators need is an external referee who takes the burden of decision-making off their shoulders. It is easy for a regulator to be captured by local industry interests, and it can be very strategic for Canada to obtain dispute settlement mechanisms in our trade agreements. The success of dispute settlement mechanisms in investment protection is well established. I can underline from my Latin American experience that dispute settlement mechanisms are essential when governments change and new administrations seek to overlook the commitments made by their predecessors. This principle can be usefully applied to regulatory disputes. And I'll switch to French. J'aimerais terminer.
I would like to conclude my comments by noting that these are difficult times in terms of the international commitment of individual countries. We all think of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine or the Chinese government's challenge to the international standard system. Unfortunately, even the United States, a leader of the international system developed in the post-war period, refuses to fully implement measures that are unfavorable to it. A recent example is the decision of the panel established under the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement on the national origin of cars. Another example is the use by the United States of the so-called national security test to protect its steel and aluminum tariffs at the World Trade Organization. While these examples underscore the size of the challenge, Canada must do its part to protect the international trading system that already exists and develop the international trading system of the future. We will do this in part by finding solutions to non-tariff barriers, and I commend the members of the committee for taking the initiative to study this issue and to propose ways forward. Thank you.
To Mr. Christides, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you very much to all the members here for the opportunity to speak with you today and appear before the committee's work. On behalf of the Canadian Nuclear Association, first I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the historical territory of the Algonquin. And on behalf of the nuclear industry, I'd really like to thank again the committee for this opportunity. Our membership represents about 100 companies across Canada, which employs about 76,000 Canadians directly and indirectly in uranium mining, exploration, fuel processing, electricity generation, production, advancement of nuclear medicine. Canada is a leading exporting country in terms of uranium, and with its CANDU technologies, is a Tier 1 nuclear country for over 60 years. Today, nuclear energy produces about 20% of Canada's non-emitting electricity, 63% in Ontario, and 30% in New Brunswick. Canada is one of the top producers and exporters of uranium, providing steady, high-quality jobs to northern Indigenous communities in Saskatchewan. Over the past decade, the Canadian nuclear industry has showcased its world-class expertise with the refurbishment of the CANDU reactors by Ontario Power Generation and Bruce Power, with these projects being on time and on budget, and really creating a strong foothold for the industry as it looks into the future, which includes small modular reactors. In terms of building on the success and working in cooperation with the provinces, the federal government, provinces being Saskatchewan, Ontario, New Brunswick, Alberta, and the federal government, there's been a wide and recognized role in terms of the opportunity that Canada has around small modular reactors. This includes OPG's decision to build an SMR, or small modular reactor, at its Darlington plant by 2030, followed by a plant potentially in Saskatchewan. And this is enabling opportunities in Eastern Europe. New Brunswick's efforts around Arctic Clean Technology and Multex Technology is looking at creating a hub in New Brunswick, which itself is creating opportunities internationally. The federal government has made recent investments in new nuclear and energy in the last budget, and we really fully acknowledge this. The Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, key ministers such as Minister Wilkinson and Guilbeault have made clear statements that nuclear energy needs to be part of the efforts to fight climate crisis and as well as to increase energy security for Canada and its partners. We fully support these initiatives. The CNA believes that the Canadian industry is a model, and it is at a crossroads in the sense of the significant opportunities that now exist for nuclear technologies in the international stage. For example, as nations are dealing with the energy crisis or climate crisis and energy security concerns, nuclear technologies have been identified as part of the solutions to those issues. However, the nuclear industry has a unique set of requirements, along with recommending that obviously international trade agreements are positive for the industry. There needs to be a set of requirements and obligations under international domestic laws for trade to enable trade in the nuclear industry. For example, the nuclear industry requires nuclear cooperation agreements between Canada, its intended countries, in order to take advantage of those opportunities. So therefore, as we are looking at the opportunity around Canada's international trade, we're looking at nuclear cooperation agreement processes to be well funded and supported by the Canadian government in order for those opportunities to be enabled. There are other countries that are also looking at the international opportunities around nuclear. Those include the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Japan. All are looking at providing or augmenting their capabilities in the nuclear expertise and nuclear energy to meet the growing demand for the technologies overseas. Hence, we are encouraged that in the context of existing and new trade agreements, that we would make the following recommendations. One, we would include nuclear in any clean energy or green definitions within international trade agreements as a way of signaling the inclusion of nuclear technologies. Secondly, we would encourage the continued alignment between the international trade agreements that Canada signs and its own nuclear cooperation agreement processes, and just making sure that the departments are well resourced to take advantage of these growing market that we're expecting. We also look at the clear inclusion of nuclear in the financial models, whether it's the Export Development Corporation or Canadian Commercial Corporation, to engender the opportunity to export Canadian capabilities abroad. The financial models are there, but they need to be much more explicitly stated. And we're looking at continually supporting efforts by the regulators, CNSC, and encourage them to continue the good work that they're doing and looking at the opportunities to harmonize both internationally with some of these new technologies, the regulatory regimes as engendering the opportunities around nuclear technologies abroad. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, on to Mr. Adams, please.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of the 15 members of the Global Automakers of Canada to discuss the important topic of non-tariff barriers to trade under Canada's international trade agreements. A fundamental tenet of the Global Automakers of Canada has been its longstanding support for transparent, open, rules-based trade in automotive goods. Let me begin by stating that Canada's automotive industry is a product of trade agreements from the 1965 Automotive Products Trade Agreement, or AutoPact, with the United States through the CUSMA of 2020. While the Canada-Korea FTA, the CETA, and the CPTPP facilitated some automotive trade, it should be understood that Canada's automotive industry was built on the premise of supporting an integrated North American automotive market and is reliant on barrier-free access to that market. For all five of manufacturers of vehicles in Canada, the market for their production is almost exclusively North American. The Canadian manufacturing entities of both American and Japanese companies were established in Canada via trade agreements and trade policy dating back more than 50 years. The intent of North American automotive trade policy was then to produce vehicles in factories on either side of the 49th parallel for both markets to take advantage of the economies of scale that arise from longer production runs. Thus, whether we are talking about Toyota or General Motors, roughly 85%, give or take, of Canadian vehicle production is exported almost exclusively to the United States. Therefore, the non-tariff barriers this committee should be concerning itself with are those related to access to the U.S. market as far as the automotive sector is concerned. While manufacturers have flirted with the idea of using facilities in Canada as export platforms to other countries overseas, the reality is that those markets are generally served by localized production of the same Japanese and American automakers that are operating in Canada. The vehicles built in Canada by any auto manufacturer are designed to suit the needs and proclivities of the North American consumers. With respect to Canada's broader automotive sector, what assures the success of the Canadian automotive parts manufacturing sector is its proximity to the Canadian-based vehicle manufacturers and to a certain extent those in the United States. While it was pivotal when Honda and Toyota established vehicle manufacturing facilities in Canada in the late 1980s, the untold story is the hundreds of parts manufacturers that also followed them to Canada to support vehicle production. The build where you sell orientation of both Toyota and Honda, as well as most of our other GAC members, has led to the establishment of vehicle manufacturing facilities in the CUSMA region to service the North American automotive market. By point of reference, in 2022, only 1.3% of Honda's sales in Canada were built outside of North America. For Toyota, that number was 18.9%. Few Canadians would appreciate that Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada is Canada's largest vehicle producer and last year produced more vehicles in Canada than Ford and General Motors combined. Honda Canada, the association's other manufacturing member, was the third largest vehicle producer in the country last year. As we have observed over the last 3 to 5 years, the automotive industry has become increasingly regionalized in nature, owing primarily to geopolitical concerns. We have all been witness to tools of industrial policy being applied to further accelerate and codify country-specific or region-specific automotive or automotive parts production, such that industrial policy seemingly trumps trade policy on any given day. Canada needs to be vigilant in this regard, especially with respect to the practices of the United States, while also ensuring that it has clean hands in not emulating these similar practices. In conclusion, the Canadian automotive industry exists to service the United States, and in addition to continuing to ensure access to that market, we need to be constantly vigilant with respect to non-tariff barriers in that relationship, whether they arise in the form of different standards, labeling provisions, subsidies, etc. I would be pleased to answer questions from committee members. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adam. Ms. McNeil, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, good morning. My name is Lisa McNeil, President of Tree of Life Canada. While Tree of Life is one of the largest distributors of specialty and natural foods in Canada, I come to you today as the importer of British clotted and double creams. Traditionally served as part of an afternoon tea alongside scones and jam, these specialty creams are sold in tea shops and retail stores across Canada. All told, we supply these creams to roughly 2,000 SMEs. Today, I am here to provide the real-world perspective on how certain non-tariff barriers imposed by the government affect small to medium-sized Canadian businesses, such as our customers and ourselves. I will also offer some recommendations as to how the government could proactively address these issues in current and future agreements. The specialty creams we distribute from our UK supplier are quite unique. They are prepared in a dedicated glass bottling plant using a proprietary production process which yields export-ready creams with a long shelf life and a fat content just below butter. Despite the fact that there are no similar products produced in Canada or in any country with whom Canada has trade agreements, Tree of Life has faced many unnecessary and burdensome barriers while trying to import these specialty creams. For years, we were nearly denied outright access to the Canadian market simply because the products do not fit naturally and neatly into any of the categories across the cream quotas. As a result, our harrowing and completely avoidable experience is played out across several quotas. First, Tree of Life has been denied access to the WTO specialty creams quota since 2016. This quota uses a tiered system which prioritizes cans of thick cream with a fat percentage 20% lower than clotted cream. Any unused quota, which hasn't happened since 2016, is given to glass jars. From 2016 to 2019, we were able to depend on supplementary cream permit process, which is granted at the discretion of the minister. However, Global Affairs Canada and the minister abruptly decided to refuse our application in 2019, encouraged us to look for a domestic producer, which doesn't exist because it's such a niche product and therefore costly to produce on a small scale. With demonstrated and steady consumer demand, you would expect that obtaining permission to import the product would be relatively simple. It's been anything but. From 2019 to 2021, we were unable to bring in any of these products tariff-free, which caused a dramatic disruption to our customers. We've since been able to secure temporary permits through the supplementary import process. But this method of access provides little room for business planning and growth and could be taken away at any time at the discretion of the minister. Because we regularly run out of this imported cream, we have to turn away customers and Canadians have to go without the product for absolutely no good policy reason. While some claim that the CPTPP will fix all market access issues with regards to Canada-UK trade, this access is not the miracle that is being portrayed. This is a result of the allocation and administration policy chosen by Canada. Indeed, for the CPTPP cream quota, distributors like us would get less than 10% of the overall quota access, cream access, and if that doesn't change, we would be importing far less than we even do today. The government can avoid these many pitfalls by revisiting its approach to quota administration and allocation for existing and future trade agreements. The comprehensive review of the allocation and administration of tariff rate quotas offers Canada the opportunity to align its quota allocation and administration policy with both its trade obligations as well as Minister Ng's mandate to ensure that trade benefits SMEs across Canada. However, for various reasons, the TRQ review, which began in 2019, has yet to be concluded. We are hoping that some of these issues are addressed when the review finally resumes. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. McNeil. All right, on to committee. Mr. Seaback, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Harvey, when you gave your opening statement, you talked about chamber members have given specific non-tariff barriers that they're concerned about. You mentioned a little bit of that in your opening statement. Are there any specific ones that you would want to raise with the committee today from a specific industry sector that you're hearing from?
I don't think, thank you for the question, but I don't think I'm exactly here today to represent some because frankly there's so many that I'd be picking and choosing a bit too much. I could mention I was preparing myself to appear in this meeting in Brussels a couple weeks ago, and as soon as I put on LinkedIn that I was going to be appearing before this committee in Brussels, people started reaching out to me, mentioning different things. One in specific, without getting into the exact company, was somebody who made mining equipment, somebody I knew from a past life in the mining industry, and who was saying that the EU legislation on safety regulations was preventing their equipment from going easily into the EU. And I think as a Canadian who's worked in the mining industry, that it's quite obvious that Canadian-made mining equipment is going to be meeting the same standards. It's strictly a non-tariff barrier that needs to be worked through these discussion groups. And that's the case for almost everything when you're talking about people of good faith who are blocking your product. It's really a question of getting into these regulatory cooperation mechanisms so that you can talk through the issue and get to the proper result, as long as what we're talking about is people of good faith who are blocking something because they don't understand exactly. If you're talking about something where people aren't of good faith and are just trying to block your product, that's when political capital, I think, needs to be expended.
I agree. So I know you don't want to get into each and every person that's gotten in touch with you, but can I suggest that you reach out to those folks who've gotten in touch with you and suggest that they reach out to the committee either through some written submissions or requesting to appear, because to me, it's great to talk about the generalities of non-tariff barriers. You gave a great summary of that. But the specific examples, I think, give the committee something to work with and to advise the government on. So I'd ask you to do that. You mentioned robust dispute settlement mechanisms as a way to resolve these things. Do you have any sort of additional comments on that? As I look around the world and see the challenges with getting disputes resolved at the WTO, we have to be able to resolve disputes within trade agreements more expeditiously. So I thought if you had some more in-depth comments you'd like to make about those, and perhaps if you want to suggest within a particular trade agreement the dispute resolution mechanisms that are working really well, and maybe if you know of some that aren't working as well as they could, if you comment on that as well.
Sure. So I think at the end of the day, the dispute settlement mechanisms in international trade law do not work in the same way the dispute settlement mechanism does in domestic law. I know that you have litigated cases in the past as a lawyer. I did at least motions 30 years ago when I was starting. And in a domestic court, you have a judge, and the judge decides, and that's it, right? You can appeal, but there's no not applying something because there's a lack of political will, et cetera. It's very, very difficult, although it also exists a bit. I think that the world right now is unfortunately going in general in a direction where people aren't applying the rules. Even the United States, as I mentioned, has had decisions that were made against it over the last year, and they're just not coming through. And that's something we're always going to deal with. But I think what you try to do is institutionalize your dispute as much as possible to give you something to hang your argument on that can maybe help overcome a certain amount of political resistance. My Latin American experience in investment disputes, my last job was with a gold mining company in Mexico for 7 years. In the past few years, there have been several investment disputes where the companies in question have actually obtained arbitral awards. Now, that's for a lot more money than your average trade dispute. But in a big trade dispute, an arbitral award can be something that actually forces the local government to stick to their national commitments. And on specific trade agreements, I'd say that the CETA appears to be the best because it creates all of these regulatory cooperation mechanisms. Now, that's a long, hard slog to get through those regulatory cooperation mechanisms. But frankly, we're talking about a group of advanced industrialized democracies who are much more willing than countries in a lot of the world to be able to talk through these issues with us. But the CETA is, I'd say, top of class, but it's still early days, and it takes a long time for these things to play out.
I wanted to ask Ms. McNeil, the challenges you've had, I would say it seems to be a non-tariff barrier that's existing within Canada. How often have you and how long have you tried to resolve that dispute? Maybe not dispute, but resolve the issue with the government?
Well, we've been working for a long time to resolve the issue with the government, but I'd like to say, you know, the biggest impact that we're faced right now with the trade barriers is loss of business, loss of sales. And a great example of that would be that we're not able to sell into food service due to the fact of the tight volume restrictions imposed by Global Affairs Canada. And so places like the Chateau Laurier, which is a Fairmont hotel, they can't buy from us because we're simply not able to guarantee them supply on a frequent basis. And then from a barrier perspective, our largest barrier is being forced into the supplemental cream quota process since 2016. We've talked to the government about this. It's bad for business. It's a bureaucratic process. There's uncertainty from year to year as to whether or not we're going to be able to import clotted creams. And I would end with, imagine telling your customers that you've been selling clotted cream to for over 20 years that you're not sure if you're going to be able to get them any next year. So lots of conversations.
So if I were the Minister of International
I'm sorry,
Trade,
Mr.
what's the
Seaback, you're
fix?
out of time.
Sorry.
Fixed
On to
allocation.
Mr. Varani, please, for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair. So there's a lot of echo that I'm hearing, but I guess that's just what we'll deal with. I want to say thank you to all of the witnesses for appearing. It's really informative and helpful for this discussion. I wanted to direct my first set of questions to George Christidis and David Adams. I'm quite taken by sort of the initiatives that are happening with nuclear. And George, you and I have discussed this in the past, but obviously in budget 2023, there's some major shifts that are occurring. You see clean electricity generation tax credits of 15% that apply to both large and small modular reactors. You also see a clean tech manufacturing tax credit of up to 30% that applies to nuclear energy equipment, a commitment to extend the reduced tax rates for zero emission tech manufacturers that is broadened out by 3 years, but the broadening out also includes subsuming nuclear equipment within it. We've heard from what the Prime Minister was saying at a U of O conference just last week here in Ottawa about needing more nuclear. We've had Chrystia Freeland at the Pickering plant. These are all steps in the right direction. The question I had to you is that I've also heard from when VW was here with that very massive announcement that was made for George and David's benefit about the reason that they're putting their first ever electric battery manufacturing plant outside of Europe in Ontario is because of the cleanliness of the Ontario grid. It's 90% non-emitting right now. So if you could comment on sort of, George, about sort of the signals in the budget, how you feel about those. And David, if you could wed in this perspective about what a clean grid that's also being cleaned by nuclear, what that means for the next set of investments from a future VW in terms of sort of attracting investment into the country. So over to the two of you. If I could ask you for about 60 to 80 seconds each, that'd be great. Thank you.
So I'll take it. I'll start. So obviously the federal budget tabled by the Deputy Prime Minister was very significant in terms of setting the stage for growth, continued growth and acceleration of growth of the nuclear industry in Canada, as you pointed out, in terms of the areas and the investment tax credit, the inclusions. So we see it as a very positive signal, along with the international signals that are there, as you pointed out, both by the Prime Minister domestically, but also the recent statement issued by President Biden / Prime Minister Trudeau, as well as the recent G7, G5 ministerial meetings and energy ministers' meetings in Japan, where Minister Wilkinson attended. So there's a significant signal that's occurring where nuclear will have to be part of the solution to meeting the climate crisis and the increased concerns over energy security in key markets such as Eastern Europe, where you have already a Romania, which is a can-do country, and we're fully engaged there. And so that type of opportunity is real. And it's there for Canada, and other countries are mobilizing, of course, to try to take advantage of these opportunities. And in terms of the VW, I can't speak to the deal particularly, other than what I've read in the press, but it's certainly very true that clean energy will become a fundamental point for any investments moving forward across various different sectors. We're seeing this domestically, where the natural resource sectors are looking at, for example, very small reactors and how those could be applicable in the development and export of resources abroad. But also we're seeing it with large industrial users, which are looking at technologies of small modular reactors, as well as potentially large reactors in various different ways that will increase the availability of clean energy that's also reliable. Because one thing that you can say is when you look in different markets, in Europe, for example, they've had a certain learning where they did not take a multi-technology approach. And they've left themselves vulnerable, and their industrial base has sort of, had to adjust accordingly, and they've seen emissions go up. And there, I must say, it's, if you take a look at the experience of Germany, where it made certain decisions where they've significantly seen an increase in emissions, and they also have experienced energy insecurity. So from that perspective, it's an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just turn to David and ask him to comment on that VW deal specifically and the cleanliness of the Ontario grid. I think you're on mute, Mr. Adams.
I think I could echo George's comments about the provisions in the budget as far as investment tax credits. To your specific questions about importance of green electricity, I think it's the importance of the whole sort of green supply chain, if you will, from green steel that's being produced, will be produced out in Hamilton Way, clean electricity, of course. All those things are important factors as we enter an increasing investment climate that is governed by, or not governed by, but at least has some significant ESG concerns baked into them. And I think this will only become increasingly more important as we move further into the future.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
No, I'm sorry. You have 14 seconds remaining.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Savard Tremblay for 6 minutes.
Mr. Savard Tremblay, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank all witnesses for their presentations and testimonies. My greetings also go to my colleagues. My first question goes to Mr. Harvey. Good day. We are aware of that waste, the agreement with the EU, where the negotiators or the political class told Quebecers that there would be a step back in subsectors, but in exchange, there will be more possibilities on the European market. Now, Canada and Ottawa apparently had not anticipated some of the non-tariff barriers. That's what we're discovering today. The EU is using non-tariff barriers to respond to aspirations of the civil society, environmental concerns, and so on. Global Affairs on its website says that Canada has to pursue its objectives while adopting regulations that correspond to less restrictive concerns. So the policies that are good for the population, taking into account trade possibilities. Where do we find the balance? Do you think that we have found a good balance when it comes to the situation in Canada? I don't know if we've reached a balance. What I could say is that trade between Canada and the EU has increased over the past few years, and it's positive. When it comes to cooperation and regulations, solutions are found when there are any disputes or disagreements. So could we align regulations to make sure that we don't have lots of disparities, so that the environmental disparities will not be too great? For example, if there's a lot more, we need to find a balance. No, I don't think that's what it's about. If there are similar, I think there are similar regulations. The situation is that there's a misunderstanding when it comes to how the systems of a country function. So what we need is discussions and explanations. We need to avoid a situation where regulations like environmental regulations, which are legitimate, are not a way of introducing barriers. You know, we are an export economy, and amongst your members, you have national and foreign investors, so you're able to talk on behalf of everyone. When you compare Canada with other countries with which we do trade, when you look at the national policies and obligations, what do you think of Canada's position? Well, sometimes we use our systems correctly or incorrectly, and sometimes it causes problems for businesses right here. So we need to bear that in mind when we are in other countries. When I was a diplomat in another country, sometimes I would comment on the national system, and I was told, do you think that you're better treated in Canada? So there's a balance that we need to find. But there are mechanisms for us to resolve the issues. Even though our trade with the EU has increased, we've heard of significant non-tariff barriers that exist. Would you like to mention any in particular? You've talked about environmental regulations that are legitimate, but they could also be disguised non-tariff barriers that would disadvantage Canadian and Quebec businesses. Do you have any in mind? I know that the beef producers have talked a lot about that recently, but I don't want to go into details right away, talking about some of the disputes that I do not really master as much as some of the association members. No problem. Right now, Canada is in discussion with India and some countries of Southeast Asia for trade agreements. I imagine that you are supporting some of those agreements. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you anticipate lots of challenges as well as opportunities? But let's not forget that there are human rights violations in some of these countries and regions, decried by organizations that, like Amnesty International, and we have countries, witnesses that came and talked about the Philippines and other countries where there are human rights violations, and there are also environmental violations. We talked about palm oil production. This could be an opportunity for some of your member businesses. But the conditions there, working conditions, could be disastrous. So in your opinion, do you think that Canada could introduce non-tariff measures right here to prevent products that may be cheaper but produced under those conditions from coming to our market? It's not that we are against non-tariff barriers, because it's totally legitimate to regulate working conditions, environmental conditions. What we want to avoid is that this should not be a disguised way of preventing access for products from some of these areas. Generally speaking, we think it's better to enter into discussions with these countries. I think that freedom of trade, generally speaking, would help to improve those working conditions and the environmental conditions.
Standings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you to the witnesses who are here before us today. I'd like to start with Mr. Harvey and bringing up, I think some of the most egregious non-tariff trade barriers we face in Canada, the things that really affect our economy the most, are our own making. There are interprovincial non-tariff trade barriers, and I know we're talking about international ones here, but I think just from my riding, we have trade barriers on the transportation of wine across provincial boundaries. There's regulations around labor laws and transportation in general, and I'm just wondering, is this a problem when we go to the international stage and demand fixes to that? Is this something that other countries and agencies can throw back at us and say, maybe you should work on your own problems in your own backyard first? Because it seems that we haven't taken care of this in Canada.
Well, I think everybody in the world is living in a glass house on these issues. And I think we at the Chamber, you'll hear my boss, Parambiti, talking a lot about the need to improve our regulatory system inside the country and interprovincial trade barriers. Obviously, we have a lot that we can do, and every time that you show you live in a glass house, you invite somebody else to throw a stone, yes?
Right. And getting back to some of the conversations around the dispute settlements and, when these regulations, that are perhaps set up for good reason, whether it's environmental reasons or labor issues, and then are used for more, that are discriminatory, used in a discriminatory fashion. What are the best... You mentioned the CETA mechanisms as being some of the best, and what makes them better than the other mechanisms we have available to us?
I think partly it's the institutional nature of having committees or councils where the two sides meet to talk through issues in a way that allows them to come to a solution. But in part, I think it's just the fact that the EU members and Canada as advanced industrial democracies are maybe better able to talk things through, and it can be more difficult with countries that have a lot different system than ours.
Right, and these are basically state-to-state dispute mechanisms? Or
In the CETA, it's often that you bring regulatory authorities from Canada and regulatory authorities from the EU together to talk through disputes. And of course, there's no such thing as a Canadian regulatory authority. They're all over. They're all over the map. So what's important is to look at each dispute for our diplomats on the ground to see, okay, who are the right people in the EU, who are the right people in Canada, and then push to have those meetings to talk through disputes.
Okay. And if I have 2 minutes, I'll go to Ms. McNeil to talk about clotted cream. I never thought I'd be debating about clotted cream in the House of Commons when I began this job, but be that as may, I mean, you mentioned some of the challenges you've had with WTO. You mentioned CPTPP and the UK becoming part of that won't solve your problems. Is there some ways that we can work to fix that? Like, for instance, let's take the CPTPP as an example. You say, I mean, there's obviously some mechanism has been proposed. Is there a way we can alter that at this juncture to give you some relief there?
Absolutely. I think the best solution for us would be to fix allocations. So the challenge with the CPTPP, first of all, the ascension's probably not going to happen until 2025. So we're talking about something that's a couple of years out. But the way that the allocation method is today is disastrous for us, because I think there's 56,000 kilos that would be allowed for distributors, of which we would share that equally. And as a result of that, we wouldn't be able to bring in about this much clotted and double cream compared to what we are even able to do today with the supplementary process.
Right. And with the WTO
Well, the WTO is a challenge because it's a two-tiered quota system, right? And since 2016, we've been pushed out of Tier 2. So Tier 1 quota are the cans. Picture a can and you can pour it. And when you think about how the WTO quota is allocated, it's anything that's 10% cream or above. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't think we want to be pouring 10% creamers on our scones with jam. So it's a challenge that it's such a broad category for, and we're this niche product that simply doesn't fit properly.
And, you know, I know nothing about the WTO, really. I'm new on this committee and things like, so maybe you could explain how that could possibly be changed. Who has to make those decisions? Is it a Canadian decision?
It's the Canadian government that decides on the allocation.
That makes it easier. I mean, hopefully.
Hopefully.
But so we just have to pressure the government to.
Well, I would say that we would hope that the government, ensures that they continue quickly with this TRQ review so that the allocation method can be fixed.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On to Mr. Carey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Buenos dias, Senor Harvey. ¿Cómo está? And I was looking through your bio, and you've done a lot of work in Latin America. You probably have some insight on Mercosur, where we're moving in that regard. But with your questioning with Mr. Seebeck, you mentioned one example of, like, with mining, where there seems to be some irritants. I was wondering if you have any other examples you could give to the committee as far as what you're getting through your LinkedIn or your Twitter feed.
Sure. I mean, in Mexico in particular, there's been the issues with the Canadian energy sector. I won't speak for companies, but they've been in the media. ATCO gave back a pipeline, basically, to the Mexican authorities after an arbitration award. TC Canada came to a very good agreement with the Mexican authorities and made new investments in Mexico. But the fact that these companies had an investment treaty that allowed them to get arbitral awards, or to get almost to the point of getting an arbitral award where the Mexican government knew it was going to happen, gave them something to negotiate with, a big bargaining chip, where otherwise the Mexican government, they just changed their rules on energy in favor of their state company, CFE it's called, in such a way that was very detrimental to those Canadian companies' interests. The arbitration possibility was huge for them in settling that.
Well, I think it kind of states how important it is to get these things right. And keeping with the theme of energy, maybe Mr. Christidis, the regulatory harmonization, the opportunities you mentioned, small, medium reactors, the potential for Canada for export. We've got the uranium. I was wondering, do we have a regulatory harmonization for nuclear in the CETA agreement, the CUSMA and the CPTPP? Is there a regulatory harmonization there yet?
No, that really wouldn't be the environment, I believe, that these discussions would occur. I think the CNSC has done a super job in terms of, President Velci is having discussions at the IAEA in Vienna, where the international regulators kind of come together and talk about their issues. So our message, quite frankly, is just to continue that. In terms of the international trade agreements, it's really important just to include in the definitions, particularly as it relates to clean or green, that there's a consistency in the inclusion, not only from a Canadian perspective, but internationally as well, which we're seeing. We're seeing this trend actually occur. And to some extent, it will just facilitate those opportunities for the Canadian nuclear industry, both, again, in the uranium, the large reactors like CANDU, the SMRs, and even in terms of the nuclear waste. I must state that Canada is seen as a leader in terms of what it's projected to do or how Nuclear Waste Management Organization is managing the discussions around nuclear waste. And all those opportunities in terms of learning from Canada and accessing its services are there. Just the processes have to sort of be ready and resourced to take advantage of those opportunities.
Now, are they harmonized yet? I was kind of wondering, is it done yet? Because I know we signed these agreements in the last few years, and you mentioned Germany.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking, how easy would it be for Canada to sell into Germany?
Well, I mean, Germany is not interested, I think, in acquiring nuclear technologies. But in terms of the regulatory discussions, those are being driven by the CNSC in those international arenas, particularly at the IAEA and other collaboration it's undertaking. And like I said, it's going very well. They're very good work. It's just making sure that that is a component of the effort. In terms of Germany itself, the decision for them not to continue with nuclear operations have, quite frankly, led to a significant increase in emissions, an increased dependency on coal, and to some extent, destabilization in terms of their energy security, which is, of course, impacting Europe. So that's really a European question. It's really a German question. But you are seeing within the European Union this debate that's emerging between countries such as France, Eastern Europe, such as Romania, that is CANDU, that is looking at refurbishing and building new CANDUs, is causing an internal debate in terms of how do they increase their energy security and meet climate goals when sort of a core economy like Germany has kind of gone the other way. So that's a real issue.
But are the definitions agreed upon in the agreements we already have, or do we still have a way to go? Because the reason I'm asking, I know we're looking at trade with Canada, India, Canada, UK even, and how important it is if the government doesn't address what's the trade agreements we have moving forward with these new ones. If we don't get it done, how problematic is that going to be?
Well, the definition of clean and green to including nuclear is occurring, and the government in this federal budget announcement indicated that that's an area that they're going to be looking at as well. But there is, again, this international trend. You mentioned the UK, which has clearly included nuclear in its green definitions, and the EU, which has also modified its taxonomy to sort of enable it. So it's certainly moving in the right direction. We're just encouraging it to do so and accelerate it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kerry, your time is up.
Okay, just want to clarify that.
Mr. Arya, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Harvey, you did touch upon a bit on the current international order, the globalization as we knew during the last several decades is on its way down, and the former cheerleaders of international trade, the Western countries, are now practicing friendshoring, protectionism, and that is leading to a lot of non-tariff barriers. Canadian exports, obviously, we always face these non-tariff barriers. For example, the beef exports to Japan and South Korea faced the age of the cattle problem and the type of cuts, and even Japan putting some restrictions on the frozen beef exports. And I'm glad with your mining background, quickly the non-tariff barriers being imposed by countries like Tanzania on gold and copper concentrates, banning or limiting the exports of that, insisting on domestic processing. DRC, I believe the biggest, second biggest cobalt mine, was shut down because, again, on the non-tariff barriers of that insisting on domestic processing. Then Indonesia, especially with whom we are now discussing the free trade agreement, has now banned the export of raw nickel ore, and it is also imposing export tax up to 10%, if I am not wrong, and insisting on domestic content and domestic processing. But before I come back to you with a specific question, I have a question to Mr. Christy Das, who is not only the Vice President of Canadian Nuclear Corporation, he is also my boss because he is my constituent. George, we are negotiating a sort of preliminary trade agreement with India. India is a big market for Canadian nuclear industry, not just the uranium, but potentially a huge market for the SMRs, small modular reactors. Now that the negotiations are going on with India, I have two questions specifically, quickly. Whether the Canadian negotiating team, they consulted you on what's happening, the negotiations with India. Number two, do you see any non-tariff barriers coming up from India for the nuclear exports, or maybe for SMRs, in terms of the domestic content requirements? Like it already has got certain non-tariff barriers for the pulses exports to India. Similarly, do you foresee anything from India there?
Thank you for the question. So with regards to India specifically, we're obviously quite aware of the certain discussions that are occurring. We've had a lot more robust conversations, particularly with regards to Eastern European countries, particularly being interested in Canadian knowledge and know-how. And to that extent, India for us is an interesting market, of course. It has a very robust nuclear ecosystem on its own. What we're finding is a lot more interest in some of the Eastern European countries, particularly countries like Poland and
George,
such.
I have limited time. As our international trade team contacted Canadian Nuclear Association on the current ongoing negotiations?
Directly, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay,
no.
good. And do you foresee any specific non-tariff barriers for exports to India from your industry?
There would be questions we would have, particularly interested, obviously, in the uranium export, particularly, and other technologies that we would be able to support supply chain.
I got just 1 minute, Mr. Harvey. Specifically coming to Indonesia, I mean, talking, they're banning the export of raw nickel ore. My friend, Mr. Sawat Tremblay mentioned about the palm oil production there. With your background in mining, with your knowledge on the international trade, with this increasing non-tariff barriers in terms of insisting on local processing, local content, do you think they will affect the Canadian mining industry?
What I'd say is that the Canadian mining industry can work through those barriers more effectively if we have institutionalized processes that generally come in the context of trade agreements, to give you something really to hang your hat on when you try to solve a dispute. So it could be regulatory cooperation groups, it could be arbitration type possibilities, but to the extent that we institutionalize the dialogue through our trade agreements, it'll allow our companies to have a better chance of getting what they need.
On to Mr. Sawat Tremblay, please.
Oui, alors ma question.
My question goes to Mr. Adams, who is, I believe, still with us online. I think that your association came to testify here, if not you personally, when we were studying the American Inflation Reduction Act. Lots of initiatives are underway in the United States, and we see a very clear form of non-tariff barriers, particularly when it comes to tax credits. In spite of all representation by Americans, or rather, American representations positively influence some tax credits, but not others. Are there still some that exist? Because we talked about 47X that particularly targets batteries produced in the U.S. Do you think that Ottawa should continue its representations or submissions to the U.S. Congress for us to obtain a North American amendment of all these provisions?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for your question.
I think what Canada needs to be doing is ensuring that they're continuing to dialogue with the Americans in terms of the provisions that are the subsidies that the U.S. has implemented under the IRA. I think it was pivotal, and it was certainly our recommendation as an association to the federal government that to the extent possible, in order to benefit from foreign direct investment in the areas of batteries, electric vehicle production, whatnot, that Canada had to find a way to strategically essentially match the subsidies and whatnot that the U.S. was implementing. But I think we should make no mistake that these are provisions that are, I think, as we all know, intended to try and get manufacturing capacity, battery capacity, all that production in the United States.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn back to Mr. Harvey again, and because you have this background in the mining sector, and you mentioned some disputes involving investments. And I wonder, when I hear of disputes, international disputes with Canadian mining companies abroad, they often seem to center around taxes, local taxation, and countries trying to get some benefit from those mines in their own country. And I don't know the details of most of those, obviously, but I have heard of situations where Canadian mining companies abroad have, opened a post office box in Luxembourg, for instance, and then, basically work it so they're taxed in Luxembourg and not in Canada or in Mongolia or wherever they are actually working. And so that people of Mongolia don't get any money, the people of Canada don't get any tax benefits. And I'm just wondering if you would consider those non-tariff barriers to Canadian companies working abroad, how they decide where they're going to pay their taxes and whether they pay taxes in a fair way or not.
I mean, the tax regime in every country is different. I can assure you in the countries I work, we definitely pay taxes. What often happens in the mining industry is that the decision to invest is made at a point where the risk related to the investment is very high. Agreements are reached about what will be the level of taxation for the operation. And then the operation becomes an electoral issue where the opposition may complain that the government in power is not extracting the right amount of taxation from the company, or the government looks at the risk analysis, which is quite different after the mine has already been built and is producing than it was before the mine had been built, when the risk was much, much higher. Or quite simply, the local authorities decide that more tax should be coming, maybe because the price of the mineral has changed. So in dispute settlement around these taxation issues is often related to what were commitments made and are the commitments being held.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On to Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I'm going to begin with Ms. McNeil. If I could, I'd just like to start by reading into the record the letter of request that you had put in to appear here. And in that letter that you talk about, for a nearly 2-year period, Tree of Life was unable to bring cream into the Canadian market, despite there being no domestic supply, which came at the expense of our thousands of customers. Tree of Life was finally granted supplemental cream TRQ in 2021 after a lengthy, costly, and administratively burdensome process. It seems like my colleague had referenced earlier, the non-tariff barrier facing your operations is more on the regulatory administrative issue around the TRQs here from the Canadian government that you're facing. And how do we fix it? You talked about a TRQ review that started in 2019. So if you could provide some of your suggestions on how we can go about fixing that. And who have you spoken to in the government? Have you spoken to departmental officials? Have you spoken to the minister's office?
All right, thank you. A lot of questions in there. First, I'll start with the solutions to fix, and it really is about the administration. It's about the allocation. So to fix the allocation, first I'll go to the CPTPP and the fact that the allocation only 10% is given to distributors. So our recommendation would be that we triple that, so that distributors, when we're able to use the CPTPP in 2025, distributors will have the ability to actually import enough product to help in the Canadian market. From a WTO perspective, I would say changing the two-tiered system to one that would allow a separation for those high fat content creams. Like I talked about, our cream that we're importing from the UK is a 55% fat content just below butter, and we're in the same TRQ as a 10% cream, which we're pouring into our coffee. So it's too broad a range. If we could tighten that up, that would be great. And then just ensuring that the TRQ review resumes in short order and that the allocation method is fixed. As far as answering your second question, yes, we've met with many folks, have been gracious enough to take our meetings and listen to our story of us being an orphan among the dairy quota category.
Thank you. Now, in terms of that allocation, that's all based on the Canadian government takes that approach on the division of the allocation. They negotiate the market access, and then it's up to the federal government to then determine
how it's allocated. Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
It's 100% the Canadian government's decision.
Thank you on that. If I could go to Mr. Harvey, you had mentioned earlier about steel and aluminum in CUSMA, and currently there's a 70% North American content provisions. Melt and pour provisions apply to the steel, but not to the aluminum. And so, my riding, I've got a General Motors powertrain division, makes engines there. And aluminum heads. I mean, so they have to compete, and they're using Canadian aluminum for that. And then in Mexico, they don't have those same requirements because of that. And I'm just wondering, I mean, are there ways? Is that kind of like a deterrent or a barrier that they may face? Because Mexico could be bringing in scrap aluminum ingots from China to compete to create the automotive engines that they're creating.
It could be what I referred to specifically was the fact that the United States, it wasn't CUSMA in this case, it was a WTO decision recently, where the United States had said that it implemented its quotas because of national security reasons. You might remember that from President Trump. And the WTO basically said no, and the United States has just responded that it's a national security issue, so the WTO has nothing to say about the matter, right? So what I'd say to that is, in a broad sense, it's always better when we have these dispute settlement mechanisms like we have in the WTO, and that doesn't mean that it's necessarily solved because countries might not implement.
But that wasn't my question. My question resolved around CUSMA, the 70% North American content.
Yep.
The melt and pour extends to steel, but it doesn't extend to aluminum. By not including that, there are ways for Mexico to get around some of the provisions and therefore use China-based ingots for aluminum, whereas a GM facility in North America is having to use North American produced aluminum. So in fact, their costs are a little bit higher than those engines it has to compete against that come from Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baldwin.
Yeah.
If you want to give a brief answer, Mr. Harvey?
I don't have my. It's just, obviously that's a question for the negotiation inside CUSMA, and to the extent that there are disputes, it's better that we have mechanisms like we do inside CUSMA.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes, please.
Good segue. 232 tariffs. I represent Sault Ste. Marie, where Algoma Steel is located, and certainly that is an example of something made up, quite frankly. We were never a national security threat to the United States. I wake up in the morning, I look out my bedroom window, I see the United States. There's a little river in between us. I don't see any gunships in there. There's no barbed wire. It's not mined. We are integrated. And so I'm glad we're studying these trade-related kind of barriers, these little trick shots that are used by different countries. I remember when I was in high school, Sir James Dunn and Sault Ste. Marie, then Trade Minister Jim Kelleher, I talked about these, actually. It was very interesting to hear that as a teenager, and he pointed out that sometimes the United States, what they will do, and other countries do this as well, they'll pick on, say, a vaccine that we're using on swine or pigs. He used that as an example. And they say, well, we haven't tested or we have not completely finished our testing. And, it allows them that time to keep the swine out of the United States. And so there are all these other little tricks and such. But recently, we had the Minister of Transport in Sault Ste. Marie, and we had a round table. And there was our large employers like Algoma Steel and Tenaris, but Rory Ring, who is the head of the Chamber of Commerce for Sault Ste. Marie, was there. And we had a really good discussion, and because we're a border town, we always talk about transportation, and we spent a lot of time talking about a national transportation strategy, which is identified in Budget 2023. And, there was a lot of discussion about the importance of that. So through you, Madam Chair, to our presenter, I would like to get your perspective on how important a national trade transportation strategy is, what should be in it, in your opinion, to help alleviate some of these pressures and issues related to trade for Canada.
In a broad sense, we've argued regularly that the way that Canada can most contribute to international peace and security in these quite unstable times is to be able to export more. We talk a lot about food, fuel, fertilizer, critical minerals, and a lot of the time what Canada needs to do is make decisions inside Canada to be able to export our products to the world and contribute to international peace and security, the peace and security of our allies like the United States, but also the countries of Western Europe, countries like Japan, South Korea. I was with Mr. Beatty just last week in Japan, 2 weeks ago now in Japan at the Business 7 Summit. We were talking a lot about G7 solidarity. And Mr. Beatty insisted a lot on the fact that from our perspective, Canada can do more in terms of stepping up and exporting more of these products that our allies need. And a lot of that is to get rid of some internal barriers, some things inside our country that are preventing us from reaching our full potential in that sense.
It's very, very, very important that we have the opportunity to get our, not only just our critical minerals, but our various finished products to market and any value added that we can do. So I'm going to switch, thank you for that, Mr. Harvey, to George from the nuclear folks. Recently I had a meeting with the Power Workers Union, and they were talking about nuclear, obviously, and about what's in Budget 2023 and how important it was for this government to recognize the importance of nuclear in this whole mix of decarbonizing our economy. So on the same kind of thought process, I mean, Algoma Steel is where it is because of hydro and a lot of green energy. The province is going to hook us up into the power grid in particular as we go forward. But during that conversation, I also mentioned about the opportunities, and I'm going to talk about Northern Ontario, for the small nuclear reactors, right? In particular, some of the developments that are happening throughout Northern Ontario, and as well as Indigenous communities that are looking for sources of power. So could you comment on opportunities in Northern Ontario, in particular with Indigenous communities around tapping into, if you will, these small nuclear reactors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the opportunity for northern communities, Indigenous communities in Northern Ontario, but also beyond, will be what makes sense for them, right? There'll be multiple technologies that they'll be taking a look at And therefore, whether it's a very small reactor, and there's some that are very, will be coming onto market that could be applicable to them, and if they are interested, there'll be hydro opportunities, there'll be, renewable opportunities, whatever it is. The whole point is this suite of technologies to be available to communities that they can then decide what's best for them. So that's the most important thing. So they are in the technology in terms of small modular reactors. There's very small reactors, some of which are 5 megawatts and about 10 megawatts, 50 megawatts that are being looked at. And whether it's for small communities or remote communities, resource development opportunities, whether it's mining, oil sands development. There's a number of applications that could come from those, and those are being looked at with a slightly longer time frame. So you'll be hearing the small modular reactor, for example, Ontario Power Generation is building one at Darlington at 2030 that will enable on-grid opportunity in Saskatchewan. And Synthos in Poland is actually looking at that. So it's a little bit of a larger reactor. But some of those very small reactors may be applicable to those, or could be applicable to northern communities, Indigenous communities, or resource development sector based on their technology need and what's best for them. So that's really ultimately
Thank you very much. Mr. Martel, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses for appearing before us. Mr. Harvey, you talked a lot about the fact that we need discussions and better communication when we realize that we reached trade agreements, and on the way we realized that it's not what we anticipated at the beginning. Could Canada be more proactive in trying to correct the situation? If discussions were better or more up to date?
On règle des problèmes à travers les discussions.
We arrive at programs through discussions. That's how we resolve issues. It's better to have an agreement, and it doesn't work perfectly, but it's better to have the agreement because it's in that context that we can try to attain our objectives. So it's always better to have an agreement with a dispute settlement mechanism instead of having disputes without such a mechanism. Would you say that the government could be more proactive when we talk about trade agreements? Could it be more proactive in correcting the situation? We could always be more proactive. It's all about the use of resources. When we talk about trade balances and our exports are dropping and our imports are increasing, does this have a great impact on our future negotiations or on our non-tariff barriers? Or should negotiations be done differently? Because we've seen that our exports have dropped significantly since January, I believe. It all depends on the negotiation in question. Normally, we do not try to find a balance between exports and imports with a given country, because the trade system is global. Sometimes we need to export more in one area and more in another area. So we do not necessarily seek to find a balance with that for each country. My next question goes to Mr. George. The nuclear domain. How come, first of all, social acceptability of the nuclear? Maybe there's lack of information because it's clean energy. We have difficulty having this accepted because when we hear nuclear energy, everybody has difficulty accepting projects that has to do with this clean energy.
I think that's a little bit of a dated view of where the public is. I think that you're seeing a significant increase of wanting to learn about how technologies like nuclear will address issues like the climate crisis. And it's really this transformation of the realization that emissions need to be reduced, and therefore all technologies having to relook at this. So you could look at a number of jurisdictions. around the world, whether it's the evolution of the inclusion of nuclear here in Canada, which was very explicit and very supportive in the last federal budget. Also that in the United States by the Biden administration, the UK, France, and Japan. And everyone knows the history in terms of the technologies, and therefore the inclusion of these technologies as part of a solution to those issues is really driving a much more sort of a renewed interest in understanding and look at nuclear, which is transforming and increased support.
Oui, lorsque vous avez parlé au début.
How much time? You talked about trade negotiations and you talked about requirements. Could you be more specific? What requirements should be implemented, in your opinion?
Fundamentally, the message is, I'll say very quickly, is really the recognition that nuclear has environmental benefit and energy security benefit. And if you look at the world now with the relationship vis-a-vis what's happened in Ukraine, this will intensify. There will be a lot more interest in having nuclear technologies as part of those solutions. Therefore, trade agreements in general need to sort of embed common definitions like clean and green, for example, that would include nuclear. That's across the board. And in parallel, because we require non-proliferation agreement requirements, we need nuclear cooperation agreements. The processes of government need to be resourced to enable those type of agreements to proceed. The government has done a very good job in doing that. We just need to be ready to maximize the opportunities as they present themselves.
Thank you very much. On to Ms. Dillon for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Currently, Canada exports the majority of mined uranium, around 75%. Could a potential Canada-Asian free trade agreement open new export opportunities by removing non-tariff trade barriers?
Yeah, I mean, the interest of Canada is like one of the top uranium producers and exporters, and therefore there'd be high interest in the industry to facilitate, exporting more of the product. And yes, I think there's an opportunity that if Canada is able in the international trade discussions to include robust discussions, which they already are. I mean, the government does support that, but I think it's just a realization that there's this unique opportunity where Canadian nuclear technologies, Canadian nuclear uranium is now being seen from the context of displacing, other resources, whether it's from Russia, et cetera, that is now a unique opportunity.
Perfect. And are opportunities emerging to keep more of Canada's uranium at home through the development of medical isotopes? And do you expect opportunities to grow?
Yeah, so the medical isotopes, which are obviously very important, Ontario Power Generation, Bruce Power, et cetera, they are producing from CANDU reactors isotope technologies or isotopes that are used for medical purposes. And yes, that is a very unique product that will have international opportunities.
And are there any particular countries or regions where non-tariff trade barriers are particularly common or challenging for Canadian businesses? Anyone can answer that question. And if so, what are some of the specific issues that arise in those countries or regions when it comes to that?
Well, certainly from a Canadian nuclear perspective, given the nuclear technologies, you need nuclear cooperation agreements to be in place between Canada and those respective markets. Geopolitics is going to play a significant role in terms of some of those discussions, whether it's exporting more uranium or nuclear technologies like CANDU, et cetera. So we recognize that the government just has to include in its efforts as part of its international trade program to include nuclear more robustly, as robustly as possible, and as a way of addressing some of those issues, climate and energy security.
Okay, and as we all know, did you want to add anything?
Well, this would maybe give me the opportunity to answer something I don't think I did earlier, which was about Mercosur. Just to say that I've got a lot of experience in that region. I've lived 4 years in Brazil, and I worked a lot in Argentina over the years. And it's not easy negotiations with Mercosur, but I think it is a context where if we were able to get to a trade agreement where we included good regulatory cooperation, we could really improve the situation in terms of non-tariff trade barriers there.
Mr. Adams, I believe you had your hand up. You wanted to contribute to that conversation. Please go ahead.
Yes, I did. Just very quickly, with respect to the automotive industry, I think it's very important that we keep this in mind in terms of trade barriers. And I think we all are aware of what happened with the Inflation Reduction Act when, at least at first glance, first blush, we worked through it. But EVs that will be built in Canada were originally excluded from the tax credit in the United States. That's been rectified, but there are still other challenges that we need to work through.
Thank you, Mr. Adams, for adding that. I'd like to maybe continue with you. As we all know, Canada exports the vast majority of its manufactured vehicles to the U.S. CUSMA came into force in Canada in July 2020. Can you tell us what benefits this free trade agreement provided the auto sector with, both overall and specifically in relation to the removal of non-tariff barriers? Thank you.
Sure. I think the biggest benefit that it provided to Canada was continued access to the U.S. market. And as I said in my opening remarks, having that access to the American market is pivotal for the survival of the Canadian auto manufacturing sector, because 85% of our production does go to the United States. I think the other benefits that arose from the CUSMA trade agreement were some of the provisions that, I guess you look at it, for Canada and the United States, the increased content provisions, ensure that more work will be done, principally in the United States, but also Canada is a beneficiary of that as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Mr. Adams, considering that there are some negotiations underway or soon with India, UK, and so on, which tariff barriers should be closely studied, rather non-tariff barriers, that's what I meant, which of them should be eliminated or should be studied more closely so that our local businesses could benefit from the electrification of the transportation that we see throughout the world?
Yeah, I think I would respond in reference to my earlier comments, my opening remarks, is that the manufacturing that we have in Canada, whether it's parts or vehicle manufacturing is principally oriented around the United States. So we need to be ensure that you don't have any regulatory barriers, non-tariff barriers with the United States. That being the case, and likewise, our parts manufacturers are oriented around vehicle manufacturing in Canada. So I think the thing that we can most do is create an environment in Canada for foreign direct investment. I think at this point, and it's always been the case with the Canadian automotive industry, it's not so much a platform to export to other jurisdictions as it is servicing the integrated North American marketplace.
1 minute. 1 minute. You are saying that we should be looking at the integrated non-American market. A while ago, talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, which we had to look into more closely, do you think that at the same time we should also anticipate measures, not necessarily that will imitate the measures being adopted in the U.S., but something that could be more profitable to our businesses?
I think Canada needs to seek out areas where it has competitive advantage. And as we've talked about already in the committee hearing today, some of those competitive advantages are in the areas of clean electricity. We've got an abundance of critical minerals. Our real challenge is going to be getting those critical minerals out of the ground and processed and being able to be utilized by battery manufacturing and whatnot in Canada. But I think to the extent that we can continue to ensure that our policies, regulations, rules are aligned with those in the United States with respect to the automotive industry, the better off we'll be. And I think one of the shortfalls of maybe NAFTA had been a success because we didn't have very regular dialogue with the United States. And I think that became apparent in our CUSMA negotiations. So I would encourage that ongoing dialogue, regular dialogue with our U.S. colleagues as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And we'll turn to Mr. Adams as well, just to perhaps get some more detail on what the non-tariff trade barriers, the important ones that are facing the automotive manufacturers. You mentioned different standards and labeling. I'm just wondering, just provide some more detail on which of those are important, how they affect us here in Canada.
Well, I think the Inflation Reduction Act has proven to be a good example. I mentioned a moment ago the tax credit situation, which we were able to, through negotiation and discussion with the Americans, ensure that Canadian-built EVs would be included as part of the tax credit. But I think what we failed to realize is that, with the provisions of the IRA, unless we did something in Canada, there was going to be very minimal battery investment or electric vehicle investment in Canada as well, because of the subsidies that were put on the table by the United States. So I think these subsidies and investment credits, investment mechanisms, are all potentially non-tariff barriers to trade that we need to ensure that we're cognizant of, and also working to address, as I think the government did probably as good a job as it could with the recent federal budget, and ensuring that investments like the one that Volkswagen made, and that won't be the last investment of that type in Canada.
Okay, thank you very much.
On to Mr. Carey for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Harvey, you mentioned, I think in your opening, as long as people are not or not in bad faith, in good faith when they're negotiating and working these things through. I was wondering if you could comment on the national security test sometimes that's being used by different countries. My colleague brought up the steel and aluminum tariffs that were put on Canada. Now, at the time, I didn't think we should have had that happen. The Americans were asking, because we do build defense products together, that Canadian foundries have unique stamps, so they knew that the steel and aluminum was actually coming from Canada, because there was a dumping by Turkey and China. Now, Mr. Adams talked about the importance of regular dialoguing, and I think being proactive. I was wondering if you could comment on how countries restrict access to their markets by using this national security test. Do you see it as like a legitimate thing that we should be looking at, especially with our defense allies like the United States?
Say sometimes it's legitimate and sometimes it's not. We have national security reasons for not letting certain investments into our country. We have national security reasons for not allowing certain products into our country or into our technological systems. And then sometimes it's totally incorrect. The case in the U.S. a few years ago, I think, was an egregious case of you don't have a national security reason for preventing Canadian steel from going into the country. And I'd say that to the extent that we have agreements like CUSMA, it allows us to work through those disputes in a lot more productive way. And let's be thankful that we have these agreements to work through these things rather than doing them in thin air, right?
And Mr. Seebeck, I think, has a question.
I was going to ask Mr. Harvey again. When you started, you said you were in Brussels when you first announced that you were going to be coming to testify about this. Just wondering, in your role, do you hear from other countries that there's a lot of non-tariff barriers bringing goods into Canada? Or is it, are we, I don't know, are we the innocents in this? Or it's mostly Canadian companies that are having difficulty with non-tariff barriers?
You know what? I think the nature of my role is that people come to me to complain about non-tariff barriers abroad and not about non-tariff barriers in Canada. Obviously, Ms. McNeil is talking about a non-tariff barrier in Canada, but people don't come to me for that. And to be frank, every once in a while they do, and I say, you know what? It's not actually my job to work on those issues. So I'm in an unbalanced situation. I can tell you that as a former Canadian diplomat, people bring it up with you there when there's a barrier in Canada that they don't like.
I would just, I know this is a hard question to answer, but would you say in your experience, it's more Canadians dealing with non-tariff barriers abroad than foreign countries' businesses having to deal with similar things in Canada? I know it's a hard question.
It comes and goes. It comes and goes. What I'd say is that I've generally been paid to look after the interests of Canadians abroad and have fought for those interests. But sometimes people had counter arguments when I brought up the Canadian position, and I had to bring those counter arguments back to my headquarters and say they might have a point, right?
Okay.
To that
Sure.
question.
Go ahead. Mr. Adams?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Mr. Seebeck. I think the only comment I wanted to make there is that I know in terms of irritants for vehicles coming into Canada, the luxury tax has been flagged by my European members as being problematic, especially given the CETA that we've signed. So I would flag that for your consideration.
Much.
All right. Okay, on to Mr. Miao, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for appearance today. I'd like to direct my question through the chair to Mr. Adam online. As your opening remark, you mentioned about the trades of vehicles across globally. How do you stay informed and update on the new and changing non-tariff trade barrier when exporting vehicles? And have you used the Trade Commissioner service for registering any of the trade barriers?
Thank you very much for the question. As I mentioned earlier, primarily I try and keep track of any non-tariff trade barriers between Canada and the United States because that's principally where our manufacturing members, Toyota and Honda, and really any of the manufacturers in Canada, any of the 85% of their production goes into that jurisdiction. So keeping track of what's going on in the United States is of concern. And then also on the other side of the house, as I just mentioned a moment ago, I do get flags from time to time from some of our membership that are experiencing challenges potentially bringing vehicles into Canada. So not really utilizing the Trade Commissioner service as much as perhaps we could.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I think my colleague online, Arif, have more questions to ask. I'll share my time with him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miao. I'm going to turn back to Mr. Christidis. My colleague Terry Sheehan had been asking you a bit about northern and remote communities. And I'll tell you one thing that we hear a lot about, and rightfully so, is about fossil fuel subsidies and bringing them to an end. And one thing that we're faced with is mobile diesel fuel running engines that provide power where there's no other source available for remote communities that are often indigenous. I appreciate the point you're making that whatever happens in those communities has to be done on the terms that Indigenous people want and agree to, and let them lead it. That's critical in terms of reconciliation.
Excuse me, Mr. Brani. I'm sorry. I just have to put a halt here for a second. The bells are ringing. It's a 30-minute bell. Is the wish of the committee to continue to till 1 o'clock and then adjourn as normal? We would still have sufficient time to get to the House or vote on our app here. So is there unanimous consent to continue with the meeting? Yes? Am I getting yeses from everybody? I'm going to learn to say if I don't hear no's, I'm going with yes. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Varani, back over to you for 2 minutes, 54 seconds.
Sure. So, Mr. Christidis, what I was saying is that obviously whatever happens in remote communities where there's Indigenous people staying is obviously needs to be done on their terms and led by the Indigenous communities that are there. But if the SMR potential is realized, would it not be a way of both curing the argument about fossil fuel subsidies, because SMRs would be a non-emitting source of energy, but also addressing the acute energy needs of some isolated locations in Canada? If you could just comment on that.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for the question. So the very small reactors would provide an opportunity for those Indigenous communities, northern communities, to have a non-emitting technology. a clean technology that will be able to displace diesel. And with the carbon pricing and the cost associated with emissions, as it were, placed on diesel, it would be an opportunity to transform away from those energy sources, for sure.
Okay, and if I could just stay with you and just in this last little bit, you mentioned Romania a couple of times. They're already a CANDU client. They want more reactors. Are there any non-tariff trade barriers that you see that we can remove to enhance our ability to export Canadian nuclear expertise so that it exemplifies and sort of accentuates this great Canadian industry, great Canadian technology, and great Canadian know-how?
Yeah, it's really an opportunity to make sure that in the nuclear energy space, nuclear exports do require state involvement, state promotion, which of course the Canadian government has done, but just to continue those efforts, the coordinating between working with like-minded countries, in the case of Romania and other Eastern Europeans, will be very much about energy security and making sure that the financial models are in place that would help support that export, which in the end supports Canadian supply chain in Canada, but also enables these countries to have a very long-term relationship with countries like Canada that obviously meet their climate and energy security goals. So a country like Romania is looking for that type of financial modeling that would be supportive of their goals.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christidis. Madam Chair, I have nothing further. Thanks.
Mr. Martel, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, my question is for Mr. Harvey. In a study carried out in 2019, Statistics Canada asserts that non-tariff barriers are the main source of trade frictions between Canada and the United States. So for the various sectors in Canada, what are the most important non-tariff barriers that have caused incidents between Canada and the U.S.? What is the total economic cost as an estimate? I didn't prepare with specific statistics, but we all know sectors where it was complicated, like the softwood lumber sector. This is something we've been discussing for decades. We've just talked about steel. Let me come back to what I said at the beginning of my presentation. It's normal to have non-tariff barriers, and where trade agreements can be useful is to guide discussions for Canadian businesses who have difficulty arriving at a committee, a board, or a discussion group, and that have difficulty resolving their disputes. It's not perfect. There are disputes that were never resolved, but we hope that someday those disputes will be resolved. It's because we're trying to be perfect. That's why we are asking questions. For COSMA and CETA, and CPTPP, there are some irritants that are involved. Has something been done to resolve those irritants? Sometimes, I talked about Europe. I took part in a panel in Brussels. I participated virtually in that committee. There's a cooperation committee for regulations within the framework of that agreement that allows regulatory authorities from the two countries or from the two systems, because Europe is more than a country, it helps them arrive at a common position, and this helps them resolve some disputes. It's all about dialoguing, prioritizing, and trying to resolve disputes when it's possible. I understand that if we don't address those trade irritants right now, we agree it's important to do so, because very soon there are going to be new trade agreements between Canada and India. I think that agreement with Europe now is a lot better. For India, I know it's surely going to be a difficult negotiation. So we need to focus on regulatory cooperation. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Harvey.
On to Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our presenters here this afternoon for this really important testimony. As I alluded to, I'd ran out a bit of time, and I wanted to stick, of course, with steel. But not steel. I wanted to talk about the whole, up and down supply chains. It relates to the auto industry. So our friend online from the auto industry, if you could describe, we really were ahead of the Americans, quite frankly, from 2015 on in our efforts to decarbonize the economy. And you've seen recently the investments at the steel industry in Sault Ste. Marie and Algoma that is really, really going to make a huge difference. It's going to anchor Algoma Steel into Sault Ste. Marie for generation. We're calling it generational funding. I mean, the steel workers are going around, and they're the ones saying that, hey, if my grandkid wants to be a steel worker, he or she, if they choose, can. It's also taking 1 million cars off the road, the equivalent therein. So it's pretty significant. But then we're seeing a lot of things happening with the recent announcement with the Volkswagen EV batteries. We're seeing a lot of focus on the, unlocking even more of the critical minerals that are needed for the industry. So through you, Madam Speaker, to our presenter, could you talk about these non-trade barriers and how, if they target one area of that supply chain, and there's many pieces of that supply chain that I haven't talked to. I talked a little bit about the transportation stuff, but how that could upset the whole apple cart, if you will. And please also speak a bit about unlocking even more critical minerals and that potential. So through you, Madam Chair, to the presenter. You're on mute.
Madam Chair, Mr. Sheehan, thanks very much for the question. Appreciate it. You highlight a key point, and I think it's a point that's come hit home to everybody in every industry, but especially I would think the auto industry through COVID is the fragility of the global supply chain and the importance of having control over our global supply chain. I think the reality is, though, as we do more of so-called friendshoring and repatriating some of this manufacturing, our supply chains back to our North American region, that provides security, but it also comes at a cost, which tends to mean increased prices to consumers as well. I think we've seen non-tariff barriers potentially applied, as I said, through the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of trying to ensure that that battery production, for instance, electric vehicle production, is done in the United States, and we need to continue to be vigilant and taking the appropriate action to ensure that we maintain some of that here in Canada. In terms of other non-tariff barriers with respect to our supply chain, I think the biggest challenge for elements that go into that electric vehicle supply chain that aren't or can't be sourced domestically at the moment is other jurisdictions realizing the value of those critical minerals and potentially putting export controls on those critical minerals as well, which only introduces more vulnerabilities into the supply chain. I'm not sure that I've exactly answered your question, but I'll leave it there for now. And if you have a rejoinder, happy to try and answer that.
1 minute left. I'm going to go back to Michael. And you were talking about Mr. Beattie meeting in Japan. I'm also co-chair of Canada-Japan, and I had an opportunity to meet with him last week, and we were talking about things. And, how important is it, for that relationship with Japan to the Canadian economy? And I look at Kitimat, for an example. I'm trying to remember the number. I think they're about 15% of a $40 billion investment that's unlocking that potential. But how important is Japan to unlocking some of these critical, the investment that they have, some of these critical minerals? To you, Michael.
Sure, I'd say tremendously important. It's very interesting to be in Japan, speaking with the Japanese and trying to understand their perspective on the events in the world. But what they were explaining to us is some of their difficulties in terms of natural gas importing, where they got their natural gas from Russia, and that's become much, much more difficult. The fact that they're right next to China and how interlocked their economies are. And for them, energy is a big national security issue in particular. And they look at Canada as a friendly, democratic country that can provide them with energy that's got a higher ethical profile, a better environmental profile, and that they would just love for us to produce more and for them to be able to purchase from us rather than others who create some national security issues for them.
That's why I thought it was really outstanding that they joined us in sanctioning Russia. Knowing how isolated they are with China, North Korea, and then Russia being right there too as well to put those sanctions on, those important sanctions to end this unjust war.
Absolutely. Quite a bit of their gas was coming from islands that they've owned at certain periods in history.
Very much so.
They're close. They're
the Northern
close.
Territories, yeah, for sure. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. The committee was circulated the budget for this study that we are doing. The clerks passed it to everybody. I assume everybody's supportive of it. Thank you very much to the witnesses. I will adjourn the meeting and we can get off to vote. Thank you all very much. Okay, that's done.